At 7:30 on a freezing Thursday morning, my executive corporate credit card was declined at a local coffee shop over a $35 breakfast order. Standing beside the busy counter with the cashier staring awkwardly at the payment terminal, I pulled out my phone and called my father directly. His voice came through the speaker cold, deliberate, and dripping with condescending arrogance. He told me that he had personally canceled every single corporate credit line issued in my name, sneering that my military background made me good at following orders, not managing corporate money, and that it was high time I learned my proper place in the family hierarchy. In the background, I could clearly hear the faint, mocking chuckles of my stepmother and her spoiled adult son celebrating my sudden public humiliation. I did not yell, argue, or shed a single tear. I simply ended the call, walked out to my vehicle, and drove straight to our regional commercial bank. 3 hours later, my father had 34 missed calls flashing across his phone, his corporate accounts were frozen solid, and his entire executive authority was stripped away. He truly believed he was putting a dependent daughter in her place, completely blind to the fact that I held the legal title to the very empire he stood upon. My name is Morgan Sterling. I am 36 years old, and for the past 6 years I have served as the Chief Operating Officer of Sterling Global Freight, an international supply chain and logistics enterprise. Before taking over corporate operations, I spent 9 years serving as a dedicated logistics officer in the United States Navy, managing multi-million-dollar maritime supply routes and critical logistics depots across the Pacific Theater. When my mother passed away 6 years ago, and our family firm was rapidly spiraling toward bankruptcy under my father's reckless management, I hung up my uniform and returned to civilian life. I did not return out of personal greed or ambition, but out of a deep sense of filial duty to protect my late mother's legacy and save hundreds of honest employees from losing their livelihoods. When my corporate card was declined that morning, I initially assumed it was a simple automated security glitch, but my father's patronizing voice quickly confirmed that this was a deliberate, calculated act of personal betrayal designed to force my submission. To understand my father's arrogance, you have to understand the true financial reality behind Sterling Global Freight. When I took over operations, the company was less than 4 months away from complete liquidation and insolvency. Incompetent leadership, bloated vanity projects, and high-interest unsecured loans had completely drained the firm's primary cash reserves. I did not just work 80-hour weeks renegotiating crushing vendor debts, streamlining operations, and securing lucrative military transport contracts. I injected my late mother's entire multi-million-dollar estate trust directly into the company's emergency recapitalization. In exchange for saving the business, the formal legal restructuring granted my private master trust senior secured liens over all company assets and absolute controlling equity covenants. Meanwhile, my father, Walter Sterling, sat comfortably in his penthouse corner office, accepting industry awards, playing golf at exclusive clubs, and basking in public praise for a turnaround he had nothing to do with. Out of familial loyalty, I let him maintain his grand public illusions. Everything deteriorated 18 months ago when Walter married his second wife, Cassandra, an aggressive social climber who arrived with her 27-year-old son, Tristan. Tristan possessed no practical business qualifications, having cycled through dropped college courses and disastrous vanity startups funded by his mother's previous divorce settlements. Almost immediately, Cassandra began whispering poison into my father's ear, convincing him that my operational discipline was cold and unimaginative, and that Tristan possessed the dynamic modern vision the company desperately needed. Tristan demanded an executive vice president title, an unlimited luxury expense account, and direct control over our prime waterfront distribution terminals. When I officially rejected Tristan's reckless real estate speculation proposal the previous afternoon to protect our operating reserves, Walter viewed my refusal as a direct challenge to his paternal supremacy. He believed that cutting off my financial access would humiliate me, crush my independence, and force me to submit to his authority. Sitting inside my car outside that coffee shop, listening to the dial tone after Walter hung up, I felt no anger or panic, only razor-sharp clarity and resolve. I started the engine and drove directly to the regional headquarters of Commercial Trust Bank in the center of the financial district. I bypassed the main teller lines and walked straight into the private executive suite of Marcus Vance, the senior vice president of corporate lending who had managed our family's commercial accounts for over 25 years. When Marcus looked up from his desk and saw the solemn, determined look on my face, his welcoming smile instantly vanished. I sat down, placed a thick leather binder on his desk, and calmly explained that Walter had just illegally revoked my operational credit lines in a blatant attempt to force through an unapproved capital diversion. Marcus stared at me in absolute shock and disbelief, knowing better than anyone how the company's master financial structure was actually constructed. I instructed Marcus to pull up the master debt covenants and security trust instruments executed during the corporate restructuring 5 years prior. In his desperate rush to avoid public bankruptcy back then, Walter had signed every single legal document without bothering to read the strict covenants embedded within them. The corporate credit cards Walter had attempted to cancel were not funded by his personal wealth. They were sub-accounts issued directly against my master holding credit facility. By attempting to arbitrarily freeze my access without formal board authorization, Walter had triggered an immediate technical default under the master lending agreement. Under these ironclad covenants, I held the unilateral legal authority to freeze all executive expenditure lines, revoke secondary signatory authority, and assume direct administrative control over every commercial account tied to the corporate name. I gave Marcus the direct order to enforce the covenants immediately, severing Walter's financial lifeline. 10 miles across town, at an exclusive downtown rooftop steakhouse, Walter was hosting a lavish celebratory lunch with Cassandra, Tristan, and 2 commercial property brokers. They ordered $400 bottles of vintage wine, imported oysters, and prime dry-aged steaks, with Tristan loudly boasting about how he was taking over my operational division and steering the firm into lucrative luxury real estate developments. When the head waiter presented the gold tray containing a $3,000 bill, Walter casually tossed his black corporate card onto the leather folder. Minutes later, the waiter returned looking deeply uncomfortable, quietly informing Walter that the card had been declined by the terminal. Chuckling with annoyance and assuming a minor glitch, Walter handed over his secondary executive card, only for it to be declined as well. Cassandra tried her corporate platinum card, followed by Tristan's private allowance card, but every single piece of corporate plastic tied to the sterling name was entirely worthless. The smug, celebratory atmosphere at the dining table instantly collapsed into frantic public humiliation as Walter was forced to empty his personal wallet and scramble together loose cash and private checks just to cover the restaurant bill. By the time he stormed out to the valet stand in a blind rage, his smartphone was vibrating uncontrollably with automated default alerts from fuel suppliers, maritime port authorities, maintenance contractors, and equipment leasing vendors across the country. Walter called my direct phone number 34 times in 2 hours, but I calmly let every single frantic call go straight to voicemail. In an uncontrolled panic, Walter summoned an emergency board of directors meeting for 2 o'clock that afternoon at corporate headquarters, fully convinced that I had pulled a rogue administrative stunt to sabotage his banking access. He intended to use the board meeting to publicly disgrace me, strip away my operational title, and immediately vote Tristan into my executive chair. When I walked into the glass-walled boardroom at 2 o'clock, the air was suffocatingly thick with tension. Walter sat at the head of the long walnut table, his face flushed crimson and his eyes wild with fury, flanked closely by Cassandra and Tristan. Seated around the perimeter were our 4 independent board members, visibly anxious, confused, and bewildered by the sudden freezing of all corporate operations. The moment I took my seat, Walter slammed his heavy fist onto the table, shouting that I had committed corporate sabotage and that he was officially terminating my employment on the spot. Cassandra smirked with malicious satisfaction, while Tristan adjusted his designer tie, acting like an entitled young heir about to claim his corporate crown. I did not flinch or look away. I nodded quietly to Marcus Vance and our senior corporate counsel, who walked through the double doors carrying 5 thick audit dossiers. I looked straight into my father's furious eyes and told him with absolute calm that he did not possess the legal authority to fire me, because he did not own the company. Walter let out a mocking laugh, claiming his name was on the building, but I immediately countered that my name was on the title deed. I distributed the certified audit dossiers to each board member, detailing how my master trust held 65% of senior voting equity and that Walter's unauthorized credit manipulation had triggered the total transfer of operational command. As the board members reviewed the irrefutable legal filings, the room fell into dead silence. Walter's face drained of all color, his hands began to tremble, and the arrogant facade he had maintained for years completely crumbled. Cassandra stared in horror as she realized their luxury lifestyle was instantly evaporating, while Tristan sat frozen like a terrified child. I turned directly to Tristan, revoking his fabricated vice president title, terminating his unearned salary, and ordering him to clear out his desk before security escorted him from the building. Tristan scrambled out of his seat and fled the boardroom without uttering a single word. I then informed Cassandra that her leased company vehicle must be returned to the corporate garage by noon the following day. Finally, I turned to my father, presenting him with a final choice. He could quietly sign his executive retirement papers with a modest pension or face a full forensic audit into his attempts to siphon corporate funds into Cassandra's personal accounts. Defeated and broken, Walter chose retirement and surrendered his keys. Within 6 months, Cassandra filed for divorce, taking Tristan with her. I stepped into the role of Chief Executive Officer, rebuilding Sterling Global Freight into a transparent, thriving enterprise. I learned that true authority is never about shouting orders from a corner office, but about having the quiet discipline to protect your integrity and enforce boundaries when tested.